Hey everyone, before we start today's video, I'd just like to take a quick moment to sincerely apologise for what you're about to see. I am truly sorry. I like big bugs and I cannot lie. You have a brother. Well, I guess someone was going to do it, weren't they? Anyway, today I'm going to do the big books tag. This is a video I saw Megan do on her channel, Megan's Reading Revelations, a couple of days ago, and I thought it was a good idea. It's good to show some books that don't often get the sort of screen time that many of the other books we see do. So I wanted to show off a couple of the titles that are on my shelves, and this is a great opportunity to do so. So the aim of this tag is really simple, to take the 5 biggest books from your shelves that you've read and the 5 biggest that you haven't read and show them off. So if you use Goodreads, I'll echo Megan's suggestion. If you go to the page titled My Books, and then there's a sort by option at the bottom of the page where you can put in number of pages, and you can sort it and see which are the longest books by page count based on that factor. Other sites I'm sure have similar options, but I use Goodreads, so that's what I went with, and these are the books that I've got to show you today. So first of all, of the top 5 longest books that I've read by page count that I've still got on my bookshelves, 3 of those 5 were actually omnibus editions, so I'm kind of going to discount them, but I'm going to show them off anyway, because as I said, these don't get a lot of screen time, so here's their opportunity to shine. So first of those, weighing in at 1462 pages, is The Tamuli by David Eddings. This is a trilogy all in the one volume. Look at that nice bit of sun bleach in there, if you see the difference in the colour. This one I thought was a little bit weird actually. I noticed it when I went through to double check some of the pages, but if we skip towards the end of the book, that's page 455. It's kind of weird, each time they start a new book, they start the page count again at 1. Not seen that before, and I've got several omnibus editions on my shelves. The other thing that I thought was a little bit strange whilst flicking through for that, so we've got a nice map in the middle of the book, obviously because that would be at the start of the new book that we're about to start. And then turn the page, you've got the prologue, and then chapter 1 starts, you've got the same map again, but it's got a different title. So this is Sinezga, or however they want to pronounce it, and the first map is Derezia. No idea why that is, but I thought it was a little bit weird. That's The Tamuli by David Eddings. Next up at 1205 pages is The Deed of Paxenarion by Elizabeth Moon. Nice trilogy here, starting off with Sheep Farmer's Daughter. I really enjoyed this actually. This might well sneak into my top 10 list. Looking at Goodreads when I was doing the page count checks, this I think is a real Marmite book. There's a lot of love and a lot of hate, and not too much in between that I noticed in the, at least in the reviews. So I'll be interested to see if anyone's read this and what your thoughts are on it. But The Deed of Paxenarion, 1205 pages. And then the third of my omnibus editions, Paths of Darkness, which is books, there's 4 books in here, and it's books 11 to 14 really in the Dredged chronology by R.A. Salvatore, set in the Forgotten Realms. This one is part of a series that involves one of my favourite characters. I really do like the Dark Elf, Dredged Soerden, and I loved reading the stories. And I know there's a lot of people who like this little thing, so just to show, look at that. It's practically liquid. So this spine, it's been read a couple of times and it's absolutely, well, there's some signs of wear on it, but the actual spine itself is absolutely perfect. There's no creases there, because that is what you call a big floppy paperback. So getting into the actual single volume books that are going to make up the list, and top of the pile at 1195 pages is this beautiful illustrated edition, there's a lot of glare there, sorry, of The Lord of the Rings, illustrated by Alan Lee, but this is Tolkien's masterpiece, and look at that. It's really easy to find the illustrations on here, you just have to flick through. And there are so many of them. So it's a really nice copy. I've had this for 20 to 25 years in my collection and it's absolutely gorgeous, I love it. Next up at 1179 pages we have A Sword of Storms book 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This one, I've not actually read this, what I like to call a previously loved copy. This one I bought on eBay because I do not know what happened to my own copy. I did have this in hardback and it's just disappeared somewhere, so just to fill the hole in the shelf, I had to buy a new copy on eBay. You can only seem to get this in a split volume, so that's why I had to go for a pretty tatty looking single volume, because I just wanted the single volume on my shelves. But it's kind of at home actually with its brothers, because I've got probably the most mismatched set of A Song of Ice and Fire books that I've ever seen. I'll put up a little picture in the space here, but each of the 5 books is different. The missing hardback that I did have actually of book 3 was a match to one of the other books. Can't remember whether it was 1 or 2. It was just a different size because one of them was a club edition and one of them wasn't. So even then, same design but still mismatched by size. But yeah, second in the list is A Storm of Swords. Next up at 1056 pages is The Shadow Rising, book 4 of The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This one, well, The Wheel of Time and Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Individual volumes from those 2 series took up several places above the titles that I'm going to show next, but for a bit of variety I've ignored them and just taken the longest title from each of the series. So this one is it's a little bit weird actually, or I find it a little bit weird, because if you see it next to book 5, The Fires of Heaven, you can see The Fires of Heaven definitely looks longer, and it's just shy of 1,000 pages. So even though it's physically the bigger book, Fires of Heaven is about 130, 140 pages shorter than The Shadow Rising. So I guess that's down to the thickness of the paper that's being used, and it's not always the same, even though these are both albeit in the same design. They've obviously got a different thickness of paper between the 2 volumes, so there we go. Fourth in this list from my red pile is at 994 pages, The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. This is, for me, one of those titles where it's kind of the least said the better. I did enjoy this when I read it, I'm not going to deny that, but it's one of those titles that the more I look back on it, the less I actually remember why I enjoyed it. There's only one thing that I can actually remember from this book, and that's kind of the one thing that everyone seems to remember as being a bit just really way out there. So for me, it's weird, both this and Name of the Wind. I said it in my recent No Disclaimers video. These are really big titles, not just in size, but in terms of how much love people have for them. And yet, do you know what? Even for the size of them, nothing really happens. It's weird. It's just weird. And then last up in the list, 881 pages, gives us To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. So this is not only the only sci-fi title that you'll see from me, but it's also actually the only physical sci-fi book that I own. Everything else in my collection is fantasy, except for this one. So this one I read recently. I mean, it's a relatively new release, so that kind of goes without saying, but I did enjoy this one. It was probably, it went on a little bit too long. The ending was a little bit kind of strange, I guess. It didn't quite fit in for me with the rest of the book, but I did enjoy it. So Sleep in a Sea of Stars, Christopher Paolini's, pulled it off moving from fantasy to sci-fi. So then we get to the books that I haven't read, and this one I thought was a little bit more difficult because actually there's not so many big titles that I've got physical copies of that I haven't read. There's a few that I've got on the Kindle that beat the page count of the books that you'll see coming up, but as far as physical books go, I thought there wasn't really a lot to choose from. But then I remembered that I read fantasy books, so actually the shortest title that I'll show you now is still quite a long book for a lot of people, and I mustn't discount that. So in terms of what Goodreads says is the longest book that's on my physical TBR, we've got Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, at 1088 pages. I'm not going to include it though because I've got the UK edition which is broken up, so I've got a 600 and something and a 500 and something pages, so just misses out, the longer of the two, just misses out to number 5 on this list. At the top of the list though, at 986 pages, is M.L. Spencer's Dragon Mage, and it's another excuse really to show off this absolutely beautiful book. So this one, I don't know when I'm going to get to read it. Look at that misbent spine, that really does bother me. But despite that, it's a beautiful book. I don't know when I'm going to get to read it, but I hear good things, so I'm hopefully going to enjoy it whenever I do read it. Number 2 at 838 pages is Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This was a recent gift that I received and showed off in a book haul video for June, and I really enjoyed the first book in the series, Assassin's Apprentice. It grew on me. I wasn't quite sure at the start of the book, but it definitely grew on me as it got towards the end, and I'm hoping that books 2 and 3, this one, are going to be really good when I come to read them. Next up at 758 pages, we've got The Triumph of the Dwarves by Marcus Heitz. This is book 5 in the Dwarves series. It's actually a German series that's been translated into English for these copies. But I really enjoyed the first book in the series for Dwarves. I thought it was a really excellent read. The rest of them were, I would say they were enjoyable. They weren't as good, they weren't as memorable, but they were still decent reads, just didn't quite live up to book 1. So this one, we'll see how we go. One thing that does kind of annoy me a little bit, if I show you, there's books 3, 4 and 5 together. So they changed publisher in the middle. Sorry, there's a lot of glare on there from the window, but you've got 2 books from Orbit and then 1 from Joe Fletcher. And it does make a bit of a difference when you've got all 5 of them together on the shelf. And going back to those floppy books, there's a difference as well between the Joe Fletcher and the Orbit there, with one of them definitely with a different type of paper, I would say, being used there. Then at 664 pages, we've got Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. This is another one that I've recently been gifted. This one was actually by Megan, and I'm going to be doing a read along with her next month, so it's quite a timely inclusion for this video. But this one is the longest of the 3 kind of standalones that come after the original First Law trilogy. I don't think this has actually got a kind of a trilogy name, the collection of standalone titles with The Heroes and Red Country, but I've seen them available as the Kindle kind of collection under the title The Great Leveller, so that's basically what I'm going with. So this is essentially book 1 of The Great Leveller, and I'm looking forward to getting back into Joe Abercrombie's writing. And then in 5th place on my physical TBR for the biggest books, 645 pages, gives us The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. This is another one that was a new acquisition, a present from my wife for my birthday at the end of June. So I've not really had a lot of opportunity yet, but I still haven't got round to this one and do want to do so relatively soon. I know Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, he mentioned this on his recent book haul video, which I watched yesterday. By the time I publish this, there'll probably be another 2 or 3 book haul videos of Andrew's for you to go through, but he did say about getting a copy with this cover and the big floppy paperback. Well, sorry to break it to you, Andrew, but it's not very floppy. But there we go, that's my top 5 longest read and unread titles that I've got physically on my shelves. What about you? Let me know in the comments below what are the longest books that you've read and the longest books that you've got to read, and which ones you're looking forward to out of that collection. I'll catch you in another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. See you later.